Welcome, welcome everyone. We are here with Marianne Williamson, a woman whose work I've admired for many, many years now. I've read all of her books, and in fact, I just read the oldie goodie, Everyday Grace, again recently, and it's timeless, actually. It's really a great book. It's evergreen. So love all of your work. And I think last time we saw each other, it was when you graced our TEDx stage in Berkeley.
Ah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. It was such an honor to have you join us then, and it's such an honor to have you join us today. So
Thank you.
yeah, thank you too for being here. So for those who are new to your work, although I imagine that's very few, I'm going to give people just a little bit of background about you. For more than 3 decades, Marianne has been a leader in spiritual and religiously progressive circles. She's the author of 14 books, 4 of which have been #1 New York Times bestsellers. Some of her more known books include A Return to Love, A Year of Miracles, Everyday Grace, A Woman's Worth, and many others. Her latest book, A Politics of Love, which we're going to talk about today, is perfect timing given her recent announcement to run for president in 2024. Her book confronts the politics of fear with a powerful new paradigm that turns love into a political force. She urges all Americans to reach into their hearts to reclaim their love for democracy, for each other, and for our passion for what is possible. So welcome once again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Renee. I appreciate it.
Very exciting times for you now. So the first question, though, I'd like to start with rewinds the clock just a little bit. In your home growing up, you write, God was a given. What did that mean to you as a child? And how does that impact you today?
God wasn't, I'm Jewish, and there's just a sense that God is the ocean you're swimming in. And that's how I was raised. It wasn't a question, and it wasn't anything but a comfortable given. And I think that it's affected me today, and that it gave me a grounding in the idea that the meaning of our lives is somehow connected to something bigger and more important than just what we see with our physical eyes or what we try to achieve in terms of material things. I think I was raised just with the sense that we are within a larger space of meaning, opportunity, comfort, purpose. That's what it means.
I love that. You've been writing and speaking about love for years, and with it, grace. And you've had books out on both topics. And it was fascinating for me to see you weave in those core principles into your latest book and also into your early messages about what it means to be a political leader. What makes running for president now such a must for you? Because it's really a must, right? I feel that in your passion and your conviction in the videos. So what is it about now that makes it a must?
Renee, 20% of Americans are doing pretty well. There is a kind of enchanted economic island of Americans who are doing fine, thriving within today's economy. It's very easy to forget. It's very easy to buffer yourself from the realization that that island is surrounded by a vast sea of economic despair. And within that vast sea of economic despair, 64% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 68,000 Americans are dying every year from lack of health care. 1 in 4 Americans are carrying medical debt. 18 million Americans cannot afford to pay the prescriptions that their doctors give to them. A half of our seniors are living on $25,000 and less a year. 1/3 of our workers are living on less than $15 an hour and cannot afford a place to live. So that level, the rage that emanates from that, the depression that emanates from that, the anxiety that emanates from that, become a kind of petri dish out of which all manner of personal and political dysfunction inevitably emerge. We are not going to be able to stave off the worst consequences of all that. Only by offering incremental changes, we'll help you a little bit here, we'll help you a little bit there. We've got to make a fundamental economic U-turn. We've got to intervene, much like you intervene in the life of someone who is drinking too much and it's gotten to the point where they're endangering their lives. Someone who's taking drugs too much, it's gotten to the point where they're endangering their lives. I think that the reckless and irresponsible ways that our democracy is now operating, which really is less of a democracy and more of an oligarchy, is now a threat to the life of our democracy, and we have got to intervene.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. You brought something up in your book that was really powerful. And I didn't realize that, actually. So that's in civics classes, right, that always used to be mandatory in US schools. They're not mandatory anymore. And so you raise a really important issue that how can we realize the fragility of our democracy if we don't know what we're missing, if we don't understand these civic codes, if we don't understand the laws and what democracy means, how can the next generation understand that?
Now we have proactive efforts all over the country to tell teachers what they can and cannot teach, to tell librarians what they have to take off the shelves when sometimes it's great American literature, like To Kill a Mockingbird. We have the governor of Florida telling universities what classes they can't have. So things are actually much worse than they were when you encountered that in your book. So yes, if a child doesn't learn the Bill of Rights, then how can you expect that child to be horrified when they become an adult and the Bill of Rights is under an assault? And at this point, if you don't teach children what has happened in our history, how can you expect them to grow up into adults who are willing to take responsibility and correct the places in our functioning where we need to self-correct?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I mean, you had mentioned somewhere, whether it was in the book or somewhere online, that, you know, we're drowning in information, but we're starving for understanding. And, you know, the understanding needs to start, as you say, with the American story.
Well, how many of your listeners have been to therapy, have been into situations where somebody says, tell me about your parents, your grandparents, your parents' marriage. What was the family system you grew up in? And the history of America is important in order for us to understand who we are and our place in things as a generation. To understand the sweep of history is to recognize that we've never been a perfect nation, but we are established on very enlightened principles. And in every generation, this struggle is manifest between those whose hearts are ablaze with the possibility, the really earth-shattering possibility of a society in which, to the best of our ability, we give everybody a chance, if they work hard enough, to make it. And, you know, yeah, like I said before, there are 20% of Americans for whom that's actually true. But for 80% of Americans, it's arguably untrue. So that struggle between the forces which would obstruct and diminish the opportunities of every American to thrive have always been with us. And every generation makes its choice whether or not to push back. The abolitionist movement pushed back against slavery. The women's suffragist movement pushed back against the institutionalized suppression of women. The civil rights movement pushed back against segregation. And it's our time to push back. The difficulty is that for people like you and me and many of your listeners, if you don't, you know, the system has really been good at keeping the blinders up. If you're living in Tiburon, it's real easy to buffer yourself.
Really
the
is.
The system is predicated on not enough people looking around and going, wait, what's happening here? Because if you just sort of stay in your neighborhood in America and you're in that 20%, you don't necessarily see how much suffering is going on out there. You hear about the mental health crisis. You hear about the opioid crisis. You hear about overdoses. You hear about depression. You hear about anxiety and suicide. You hear about rage. You see the acting out. You read about these things. You read about the Willow Project. You read about East Palestine. You read about the SVB Bank. You see the dysfunction. It's not like if you're living in that 20%, you're stupid and you don't care. It's that it's easy to not recognize the thread of corruption that is at the bottom of all this. And I think that's what's starting to happen. I think there's an arousal of the American consciousness, conscience, recognition. I mean, we're not stupid people. But the dots have been disconnected for so many people. And also, if you're in that 20%, there's so much to do and everything's so fun and we can have careers and we can have classes and we can write books and we can have, I mean, it sort of takes an experience to make, wait, what's really going on here? Yeah. And what's really going on here outside of our immediate view sometimes are some things which are very, very dangerous. And maybe they're not at your door, but if we don't handle these things, they would get to everybody's door in time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you bring that up, the 20%, because, I've lived in 11 countries and, the divide between rich and poor in some of those countries was very evident. And it's always been like that, right? But it hasn't always been like that in the United States. And so, coming back from living abroad and then now seeing it happening around us, I mean, it's kind of astonishing and it's scary.
It is. And those who have been abroad are often more likely to recognize, wow, this is different. So what you're pointing to is the fact that we now have a wealth inequality that is greater than it's been in almost 100 years. The gap between the wages of the average worker and the average CEO has gone up to 400%. Okay. So we now have a situation where, as you said, you've got what Franklin Roosevelt called an economic royalism. This kind of aristocratic situation, and policy after policy makes it easier for those who already have to get more and harder for those who don't have to even survive day after day. And you're right. That's not what America is supposed to be. America is supposed to be a place where anybody, if they work hard enough, can make it. What's happened now, though, is that millions of people are locked out by the time they're 10 years old. If a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, definitely by 10, and millions of children are not taught to read by the age of 10, their chances of high school graduation are diminished. Their chances of incarceration are definitely increased. Yeah. So, this can't go on forever. It's unsustainable. If somebody's too intellectually lazy to read about the French Revolution, maybe they should just read Yertle the Turtle, because this never works out well for anybody.
Speaking of FDR, I know you're an FDR fan, and you talked about returning to some of his core principles around economic reform beyond the survival that so many Americans are feeling today. What would that look like for you?
It would look like universal health care. He had talked about, one of the interesting things about FDR, much like Lincoln, both men died planning what they were going to do after the war was over. But Lincoln died like literally weeks after the surrender at Appomattox, and Franklin Roosevelt died a month before the surrender of the Germans. So both of them were just here long enough to do the job. It's really interesting, isn't it? But both of them had big plans for what would happen post-war. So what Franklin Roosevelt wanted was an economic Bill of Rights. In the economic Bill of Rights, which I think of as the great unfinished business of the Democratic Party, what he wanted was universal health care. He wanted universal college. And by the way, until the 1960s, there was tuition-free or near tuition-free at state colleges and universities throughout the country. This whole college debt thing is new. It's what happened when these financial services industries decided they could make a profit center off people's desire to try to better themselves and get a higher education. It would include, by the way, and I also want to say about everything I'm saying, from universal health care to tuition-free colleges and tech school and everything else I'm about to say are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy. It would also include family leave when a child is born, that the parent could stay home for a while. It includes free child care. It includes a livable wage. It includes these things that just give you enough resources that you can take it from there. But we kneecap people. And I think people are beginning to understand in this country, why is it that the average European gets those things? And we're beginning to see it. People are waking up to this. We have been trained to expect too little. Those like yourself who have traveled, or like myself, old enough to remember the 1970s when we had a thriving middle class and the average American worker could afford a house, could afford a car, could afford a yearly vacation, could afford to send their kids to college, and could afford for one parent to stay home if they wanted. Whether it's that you've traveled or that you're old enough, you're looking around and going, what the hell is going on here? And we need to start to say it.
Yeah, we've become very complacent, I feel, as a society. So you've admired FDR. What about women? What women inspired you and
well,
why?
it's interesting. Well, it's interesting that you say that because a lot of FDR's convictions actually were planted in his mind by his own wife, Ellena Roosevelt. Ellena was the one who said to him, Franklin, the alleviation of stress is not enough. We need fundamental economic reform. But there have been female voices throughout our history who have mattered, whether it has to do with Harriet Tubman, whether it has to do with whether it has to do with Coretta Scott King, whether it has to do with Hillary Clinton, whether it has to do with Ellena Roosevelt, whether it has to do with any of the women who not only spoke in the public, but remember how many women throughout our history have been denied a public voice. Yeah. They've been denied a public voice, but they were speaking where they could and how they could, and we know that they were there.
Yeah, it's funny. Eleanor Roosevelt also said something along the lines of just do it and ask for forgiveness later.
Oh, I didn't know that. She did see a woman as like a tea bag. What she said, a tea bag, you don't know how strong you are until you get in hot water. And She also made that comment about nobody can make you feel bad about yourself unless you allow them to.
Ooh, that's a good one.
But I tell you, there's a book. This is another American woman that I really admire. Is the historian Dorothy Kearns Goodwin. And Dorothy Kearns Goodwin wrote a book called No Ordinary Time, which is about Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt during World War II and the Depression. I had seen the book on the shelves years ago. I wasn't drawn to it. I read it last year, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. Also, when you were asking about great women, I think when I was growing up, you really can't overestimate the influence of Gloria Steinem on many women my age.
Yeah, fabulous. So, it's interesting too, having traveled and having lived in many of these countries, right? I've seen women presidents and prime ministers in so many places. And then I did a little digging, right? Because I thought, okay, I'm aware of some in countries where I've lived, like Australia, New Zealand, England, the main ones. But little did I know until I started digging, it's England, right? We had Margaret Thatcher, PM,
yeah, of course.
Ireland, New Zealand, Jenny Sipley. France, Israel, ridiculous. Argentina, India, Bolivia. I mean, the list goes on. Why do you think I know it's ridiculous. Why do you think it's so hard for a so-called advanced nation like the United States to elect a woman president?
Well, Hillary Clinton did win 3 million more votes than Donald Trump did. So if you look at the popular vote, the popular vote was in favor of a woman. So I understand that she didn't technically win, obviously, because of the Electoral College. But when you're talking about the consciousness of the American people, that popular vote shows that the American people were ready. The two people who have already announced their candidacy for this year are Nikki Haley and myself. So already the two women, two people out of the gate at the beginning are both women. We're going to get there. I think the American people are ready. I think that the political establishment is doing its best to obstruct that happening. I don't think because I'm a woman, but because I'm an inconvenience politically. But we'll see what happens. It's really up to the American people to shoo that away if they think that it's an undemocratic trend, which I think it is.
It's interesting you use the word inconvenience, right? Because we spoke, I think, at New Living Expo, we ran into each other right after the last election. And I remember you said, with pain in your voice, rightfully so, you said, people didn't think I could win, right? You spoke about, she'll be good for the conversation. But, that's got to infuriate you.
That's so minimizing, isn't it?
It's so minimizing.
Yeah. There was a woman that I know, a wonderful woman in New Hampshire, who actually was talking to a group publicly when she introduced me the other day. She said, I was talking to Marianne, and I said, well, no matter what happens, it'll be good for the conversation. She pointed out that I pushed back against that. That's what we have been trained to. What man would they ever say that to? Well, you'll be good for the conversation. That's what they give us. Honey, that's okay. You can go out. You can add to the conversation. Yeah. Just don't try to get power. Yeah, that's unladylike. That's inconvenient to the system. So, yeah, I'm not doing this to add to the conversation. It's too hard. It's too brutal. And the whole thing is too important for me to be doing this because I want to, quote unquote, add to the conversation. I think we need to, once again, expand our political imaginations and say, no, what we want to do is put in the White House someone who believes that the fundamental economic U-turn represented by an agenda like mine is what we need in this country to begin a season of repair.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's feminine values, right? That we're so broken that unless we equalize power, because it's been out of power for so long now, right? That everything's broken, right? Our environment, all of these are the environment, education. I mean, the list goes on, inequality. So I think that rebalancing of the masculine and feminine is long overdue.
And if you want that, once again, then women, and I think women need to remember, in the 1970s really was the age of feminism in which I grew up as a feminist. And it was clear that sisterhood was a large part of all this, that none of us were going to get there unless all of us got there. And today, people think of feminism more about a woman being able to achieve this or that. I think it's important that we remember the sisterhood aspect. So if women really want to see a woman, any woman, go further, we're going to have to help the other women who we see, we've got to stop asking, how are you? Are you okay? So much. And we need to instead start asking, what fabulous thing are you trying to do today? And how can I help?
Yeah. One of the other things that you brought up that I think is, I don't want to say a feminine perspective, but in a way it is a feminine perspective, right? Because you talk about that politics are not separate from moral issues, that politics are those moral issues, right? And so we have so much hatred and fear and injustice right now. We have inequality, we have racial issues. The list goes on. Those are moral issues that you're bringing to the table. Can you talk about how you plan to distill that, right, into the understanding of the American psyche about how we've become so broken and that morality needs to be part of a really integral conversation again?
At the beginning of the conversation that you and I are having, you made some comment about a new paradigm. What you're describing is not actually a new paradigm. Gandhi himself articulated the principles of nonviolence, the idea that there is an inner light within each of us that can be harnessed for political purposes. Dr. King had traveled to India, studied the principles of nonviolence, and brought them over to the United States for application in the civil rights movement during the 1960s. We don't have to reinvent a wheel. What we have to do is to remember a too often buried conversation about how the love in our hearts can be used not only to heal personal relationships, but as Gandhi said, to heal political, social, and economic relationships as well. Now, when you ask, how do you do this? When I'm actually speaking to voters, people are decent. And I'm sure you feel this having traveled around the country. We're around the world. We're decent people. We're no better, no worse than anyone else. The problem in the United States compared to other countries, and I'm curious how you feel about this, I feel that when it gets down to personal conversations, you and me together, we get as real as anyone. We get down like anyone. But when it comes to our political public dialogues, we've all been trained into the sophomoric 7th grade level of conversation, where in European, I don't see that in other countries. So my experience, not just my belief or my faith, my experience is that when you talk to a group of people in something like a presidential campaign and say, can we get real here? We've got a problem here. Can we just talk about it and put it on the table so then we can deal with it? People are like, thank you. Thank you. Can we just be real? Because you know this, and people in such fields as ours know this. If you're real, you can handle things. James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing that isn't faced can be changed. And so I think we have to do collectively what many of us know we have to do personally. Okay, put it on the table. Where have you and where have you not been the person you like to think you are? Or where have you been and where have you not been the country that you think you are? Where have you stood or not stood on the principles on which you purport to stand? And where do you need to atone for your mistakes? Where do you need to make amends? Where do you need to give up layers of thought and behavior that are keeping a better future from emerging? That's the same process for a collective as it is for an individual. And I feel that that's really what I bring to the table, a larger, more expanded vision of what's possible in America based on a deeper understanding of what is happening now and how we got here.
Well, and I think the other bravissimo thing that you bring to the table is your authenticity, and the fact that you're not afraid to get real. Because I think, the traditional status quo that we've seen so far, there's ways that you behave, there's ways that you're trained, and I'm sure you're going through that with your publicist and everything else out there. But at least half the people who were putting me down, saying she's unqualified, she didn't know what she's talking about, number one, know exactly what I'm talking about. Number two, saying that I'm so kooky, after they write that article or leave that show, they're going to their own therapy, or they're going to their own yoga class, or they're going to their own AA meeting. They know what they're doing. Yeah, I think there's so much collective trauma now that we're almost so fragile. And I hate to use that word again, but that's how it feels around me, is that
we are. People are falling apart.
Yeah, they're falling apart. Whether it's in little ways, it may not be that, they're going to therapy. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the point is, there's a feeling that things are falling apart.
They are. And that's my point. They are.
How did we get here? I mean,
we got here? Listen, it's a multidimensional problem and it's a whole systems breakdown. But we cannot ignore the tremendous part that economics plays in all this. Starting 40 some odd years ago, this paradigm, this economic mindset, some people call it neoliberalism, some people call it trickle-down economics, free market fundamentalism, hyper-capitalism, unfettered, unregulated capitalism, whatever you call it. We moved from the idea that how a corporation behaves should be with respect to all the stakeholders, the stockholders, the CEOs, and the workers, and the community, and the environment. Everybody should be seen as a stakeholder. What started to happen between 40 and 50 years ago is this idea that the only fiduciary responsibility of the corporation would be to the stockholders. And then they'd make so much money that they would create more jobs, and all that money would trickle down and lift all boats. So how are you going to do that? You do that by demonizing unions. You do it by limiting the benefits of your workers, deregulating health regulations, safety regulations, the things that actually make workers able to thrive. And so what it's done in issue after issue is made a few people very, very rich at the expense of the majority of people who were put more and more into economic survival. Now, in that economic survival of day after day, week after week, year after year, economic stress and anxiety, we ask where the mental health crisis comes from. That's a large part of it. How can you take that? I can't even imagine being in my 20s, by the way, and carrying tens of thousands of dollars worth of debt. I can't even imagine it. Especially given that I was told that if I would take out that loan and get an education, that then I would be able to close the wage gap, then I would be able to make something of my life. But now I'm straddled with so much college loan debt that I'm afraid to even try to get a job in the field that I was educated for, because if I do that, I don't know how I will ever pay back those college loans. It's wrong. It's immoral. It is. Economic injustice is immoral. You cannot separate a conversation about love from a conversation about justice. In the book of Isaiah, it says, justice, justice, thou shalt pursue. So the idea that so many people are living at the effect of an economic system that treats them almost like they're serfs, there's something very wrong about that. And we need to say so, and we need to change it.
Yeah, it's super powerful. One of the other things I look at too, compared to so many years ago, and how much has changed in the United States with immigration and so forth. And so now we have a country that is so diverse with belief systems, right? Colors, shades, textures, and so on. What do you think you will do to integrate all of those belief systems, right, in a way so that we can find common ground and get back to this kind of unity that we need as a country again?
The first principle of the United States that most applies here is the idea of e pluribus unum. And that means out of many, one. Yeah. The whole point of this country is our diversity. The whole point of the country is that we're supposed to be many different religions, many different ethnicities, many different cultures, and as we know now, even many different, sexes, sexuality, all of that, but all of us united by fealty to certain first principles, that all men are created equal, that God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that free press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of protest are sacrosanct, that everyone will be treated equally before the law. That's the great dream and ideal of actualization. Now, some of us see that and go, that is so cool. That is so exciting, man. Just think what this country will be like 50 years from now. But there are some people in this country who go, no, 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 no. This country belongs to white people. This country belongs to Christian people. And everybody else maybe will tolerate your being here, but full equality of expression, not going to have it. That is the same struggle that was with us in 1776, by the way. You had 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, but 41 of them were slave owners. So we're just moving through the next iteration of a struggle that's been at the core of the American story from the beginning.
So something I wasn't going to bring up, but I think we need to address it. And that's, women's right to choose. What are your views there, and what are we going to do?
Well, at this point, the whole thing has been thrown back to the states. The Dobbs decision has now happened. Abortion rights, women's reproductive rights should have been codified by the Democrats when they had the power, and they weren't. President Obama even had said that he was going to make it a high priority. Then he said it wasn't a high priority once he got there. They didn't think it would happen because they didn't think someone like Donald Trump was going to have a chance to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. Now it has happened, and everybody needs to get really busy really quick in their own states. There are states that are already trying to pass terribly draconian laws that limit a woman's right to choose. Listen, in South Carolina, there are 21 lawmakers in South Carolina who are actually supporting a bill that would make an abortion by any woman punishable by death. Yeah, South Carolina. Now, there's a woman named Nancy Mace, who is a Republican South Carolinian U.S. Congresswoman, and she herself has come out against that. I mean, it's insane. But the very fact that you have 21 lawmakers in that state who are even thinking of passing such a bill.
Thinking of it,
and that, by the way, for anybody who is wondering whether it's hyperbole to say that we have a neo-fascist threat in our midst, trust me, we do have a neo-fascist authoritarian threat in our midst. Telling a woman that if you have an abortion, it's punishable by death, I'm sorry, that is a fascist threat.
Yeah, draconian is an understatement.
So people just have to get busy. People, and I think that we are ready, by the way, Renee. It seems to me that people are ready. People are awakening to the fact that from this point forward, we have to look at our citizenship as an aspect of a well-lived, meaningful life. And I think we're ready to do it. But we're going to have to make our way past all the obfuscation that the system is throwing at us, making us think, oh, no, we got this. We're the adults. We got this. Clearly, they don't got this. Clearly, they don't got this, or we wouldn't be where we are now. And in this and in many other areas, I do think it's time for the girls to step in.
Yeah. Another hot button of mine is gun control. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because, certainly when I lived in England and other countries too, there are so many laws and controls around gun control.
It's just one more way in which a huge corporate interest holds the U.S. government in its grip, and that's the interest of the gun manufacturers. They want you to think it's about the Second Amendment. It's not about the Second Amendment.
But what are we going to do?
Well, the president is trying with executive orders, but what we need is to elect enough people. There was at one time, I think it was under Bill Clinton and then expired under Bill Clinton, there was a ban on AK-47s. And during that time, there were fewer mass shootings. And then it expired. And at that point, there was already a Republican House and Senate, and they lifted the prohibition against them. Those guns should not be in the hands of a private citizen. They are guns which should be used by military personnel only. But it's all about math. If you don't elect a president, which, I do think that every Democratic president has done what he could. But this is something where there are forces within the Republican Party who are unmovable by this. They are bought, sold, they are owned by the gun lobby. And until we change that, once again, we have to do more. We have to do not only to work on a campaign like this, so you have a president with these more, what you and I might see, conscious attitudes. We also have to have congresspeople and senators in there who are expressing different views. And like I said, you have to do the same thing on your local election and in your state house, because in the state house is where you're also seeing some of these threats, not only to women's rights, but also to transgender rights. We just have to dedicate our lives at this point to saving our democracy.
So the other thing I want to bring up is the word love, right? Because love is always considered this soft thing. It doesn't belong in politics.
Well, it's okay if Cory Booker talks about it. If one of them talks about it, oh, how wonderful that he did that. If I talk about it, oh, she's such a kook. But that's
so how do we make love cool? Because it's compassion.
Love is cool. Excuse me. Love is cool to a lot of people. Those who think love is cool need to stand up and show up within the political sphere. You know as well as I do that many people in the higher consciousness, transformational movement, spiritual movement have been in a very apolitical space and sort of sat that one out. They said, oh, that's so toxic. I don't want to go there. So we withdrew all our all of the force of our energy and our resources. And then, of course, it just became more toxic. What we have to do is to take a stand for what we believe and not just stay in our own silo where it feels emotionally safe to say love is cool. We need to have the bravery, the courage, the chutzpah to say, damn right, love is cool inside the political sphere. But like I said before, love without justice is not love. What does love mean in politics? It means you feed the hungry children. It means you're not okay with 12 million hungry children in the United States. You're not okay with a system that says, okay, well, we're going to bring a child tax credit. We're going to cut in half child poverty. But then when that tax credit expires, we're never going to get around to permanentizing it. It means you're not going to say it's okay to have these huge drilling projects that are going to be only making it harder and harder for humanity to survive another 100 years. It means, sometimes love says no. Sometimes the divine mother, as it were, she's fierce. She's fierce, and that's what we need to do. It's not just that love is cool. Love is fierce, and love means what it says. When we demonstrate that, we can change this world.
Yeah, and that shows up in all these areas. I mean, you brought up the environment, so I'm glad that you brought that up, because if we're not kind to Gaia, it's not sustainable for us to live on this planet.
And I always think unsustainable is too pretty a word. People really need to think what that means. Unsustainable means the possibility of whole swaths of continents where the temperature becomes so high that it's unlivable. There would be massive collapse of food systems, massive collapse of economies, hundreds of millions, possibly, climate refugees, and the absolute catastrophe that this would be on a global scale. So when we say something is unsustainable, people need to get unsustainable means millions upon millions upon millions could die.
It also means walking around with masks, right? Because the air is not healthy to breathe, right? So I don't think people want to
all of the above. And, when it comes to climate change and environmental toxins, there's no amount of money you could make to buffer yourself from the consequences that will hit everybody, no matter how much money they have. Now somebody said to me the other day, no matter what happens, Bill Gates' grandchildren will be okay. But those people are showing how much they care. They're building spaceships because many in the billionaire class know, well, we just need to find a way out of here. That's what my kids are going to do, which is just,
yeah.
What can you even say?
So in the middle of all this chaos and knowing that things are going to get stressful as you move forward on this campaign trail, what do you do to stay grounded? What do you do to keep your inner calm?
Well, I'm a student of A Course in Miracles. Prayer and meditation are absolutely essential to the maintenance of my nervous system in a way that allows me to be any semblance of the person that I wish to be.
And what would you recommend to others who are feeling?
Well, A Course in Miracles doesn't claim to have any monopoly on the truth. My whole career has been about the universal spiritual themes at the heart of all the great religious teachings. Many people know at this point, whether it's mystical Judaism, mystical Christianity, Islam, Sufism, Buddhism, or any other secular path of meditation, there are sort of three categories. One is people who are listening to us having this conversation. They know that it's true. They're already practicing on a daily basis compassion, forgiveness, meditation, prayer, etc. And they know, they're saying, yeah, I know, it's me too. It's like on a day I don't do it, it's rough. Okay, then there's a second group, which knows that it's true and is saying, yeah, it's true. I should probably do it more often. I meditate, but I don't meditate a lot, right? The third group are people who say, that sounds true, but I don't even know where to begin. And to that person, I say, just ask in your heart, express to the higher power of your own understanding, I'm willing, but I don't know where to start. And to that person, I say, books will begin falling at your feet now that you have expressed that desire.
Yeah. And the good news, too, is that there is more and more evidence and research coming out to bridge that gap, that long gap, right, between science and spirituality.
And the way I look at that is spirituality has been around for thousands of years. Modern Western science is this little upstart that's been here for a blip of time. So I don't think the great religions and spiritual traditions of the world are really looking for verification. But it's nice that they have come to understand. And it means a lot. Ooh, we have proof now, yeah.
I do think for, naturopaths and holistic doctors and people on this path of healing, right?
I agree with that. I agree. Even if you look at my website, Marianne2024.com, and you look at my whole health plan, you'll see that taking into account preventative medicine, functional medicine, all of those natural remedies are absolutely a part of my whole health plan, not only in terms of what it will take to prevent sickness, because that's another thing compared to other countries. We have a much higher rate of illness, chronic illness, than they do in other countries, right? Hello, that's not an accident. Right. Given the environmental toxins
and obesity, and obesity too.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of it having to do with the quality of our food, et cetera, food deserts and so forth. So that's definitely built into my health plan, including, now I want universal health care, but even if it wasn't universal health care, there's a plan that if you go to your doctor and the doctor gives you a diagnosis, what will often happen is that the doctor will jump straight from the diagnosis to the pharmaceutical treatment of the diagnosis. It needs to be mandated that the doctor has to present to the patient the various options, all options which have proven to be credible and have evidence of benefit to health, not only those presented by pharmaceutical companies, but those presented by more natural modalities as well.
Yeah, that's great, man. I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's going to be so many people tuning into this who are going to be wondering what that looks like, right, for your health plan. So that's really exciting because it's long overdue.
Yes, absolutely. And it's just one more way in which the non-corporate backed remedies in every area are peripheralized. So people with power aren't presenting the solutions if the solutions are not presenting short-term profits for huge corporate entities. So you have the people with the solutions, but they don't have the power. You elect me president, and the people with solutions are going to have a place at the table in a way that they currently do not necessarily have.
Great. Well, is there anything that we've missed? Anything else that you want to add? Something that we didn't talk about?
No, I really appreciate your having me. I appreciate your taking the conversation to the places where you took it. And I hope I see you again in person sometime out there in California, hopefully in Tiburon.
Yeah, absolutely. Next time you come and visit Marcy, and we'll try to get together and get you out on the water.
Well, or maybe a fundraiser or something political. While I'm running for president, I need some things more than a day at the beach, but we'll put that in there too.
You might need a little reprieve, right?
Yeah, especially with Marcy and you, a time with the girls. You're absolutely right. Actually, they're all important.
A nice glass of wine on the water will do wonders for your energy, I'm sure.
Actually, I agree with that.
Yeah. So we will all be following you on the campaign trail, and we can't wait to see your progress, because there will be progress and a lot more supporters this time around. And so just remember, y'all who are tuning in, love is the glue that's going to retether us together, not just as a nation, but also in our individual relationships in all walks of life. So on the subsequent pages, we will be putting links to where you can get Marianne's latest book, as well as her other books, and also Marianne2024.com, and also Marianne.com, which is your longstanding website that no one could get today, right? So amazing that you got that. So thank you so much.
People say, how'd you get Marianne.com? I said, it's my age. I mean, at the time, it's pretty funny, isn't it?
Well, anyway, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Renee. It's been a pleasure talking to you too. Thank you.